Hello and welcome to my channel where we talk about tips and tricks for teaching elementary music. Okay, let's get started. So for today's video, I decided that I wanted to talk about how I teach melody to my students. I've done a previous video on how I teach rhythm reading to my students, and I'll link it in the description box below in case you want to go back and look at that. My district has a rhythm focus in the fall where we lay that foundation of steady beat and all the various notes that we learn: quarter note, eighth notes, half notes, quarter rest, dotted half, whole note, eventually 16th notes with the older students. And then in the spring, we switch over to a melody focus. So as part of my anticipatory set in the beginning of my class time, I teach rhythm reading probably within the first 5 to 10 minutes of my class that we rhythm read every day until I get to the second semester, which starts in late January, and I switch over to Solfege. The students then take that foundational information that they learned with just the non-pitched rhythm patterns and they see it on a staff, and that is part of the melody learning process. Let me back up a bit. The 4-quarter note pattern right here is the first pattern that all of my students learn starting in kindergarten, because that's the very first note that I will teach them is a quarter note. So you can just see, I'm just going to go through really quick. They progress quarters to quarter rests. I'm going to go through a little bit bigger or faster. You've got half notes, eighth notes, paired eighth notes, dotted half, whole, and it just keeps going until I get to 16th notes. So the grade level determines which patterns they use. Obviously, I don't have kindergartners doing 16th note patterns. Those are for my older students. You will notice that there's no time signature on these patterns. That's because they get all mixed around. I don't always start with the 4 quarters, and to have a time signature on every pattern could be a little cumbersome. Could also throw the students off. I just wanted them to get the experience of reading the rhythms. That is the practice that I use during my anticipatory set, is reading through these rhythms. And I also put music in the background to help with keeping it steady. Because we do this every single class period, when I transition over to putting a rhythmic percussion instrument in their hand, like a tambourine or maracas or sticks or something else, they are used to seeing notated patterns. And the notated patterns look something like this. Building upon that anticipatory set of rhythm reading during every music class, the students can transfer that knowledge to what they see here in playing an actual percussion instrument such as maracas, tambourine, sticks, triangle, whatever you wanted to use. So that's how you set your students up for success with rhythmic reading on instruments, is if you do all that anticipatory set stuff to begin with. So all of that being said, that is where my students are at when we start melody teaching in late January. So in the anticipatory set, I do away with the rhythm patterns that you saw earlier, and I replace them with solfege. So they've already had that foundation of learning quarter notes, quarter rest, and all the rest of the notes. And now we are putting pitch with it. This is the very first pattern that I start with kindergarten. Actually, it's the very first pattern that I start with everybody on the first day of reintroducing solfege to the older students that have had it in past years. And I point out to them, first thing I say to them is, what is that rhythm pattern? And they know that right away, that that's ta, 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 ta. And then I point out to them the fact that there are lines and spaces up there now, and that they're not all on the same lines or spaces, and that they are pitches. And I explain to them what a pitch is, that it's a highness or lowness of a note. I also say that it's something that you could sing. I will even compare rhythmic percussion instruments with melodic percussion instruments such as bells. And I'll play the tambourine and I'll say, can you sing that note? Students will say no. I will hit a couple notes on the resonator bell set and sing along with it and say, can you sing those? And the students say yes. I said, so we're changing from one element of music, rhythm, into another element of music, melody. So just to give you a little taste of this, and you will notice that there's no clefs on these solfege cards. I did not make them. They were made by another teacher. I like them, even though there is no clef, because there is the idea, of course, of movable do, although these are pitched as if we're in the key of C and on a treble clef staff. But just go through a couple of them really quick for you to see what they kind of look like and how they progress. You've got so me, and then you add la. And if you're curious what this is down here, during the previous months when we were virtual, I recorded my voice singing these actual patterns, and I posted them up on Google Classroom so that if students wanted to practice, they could just go in and practice and listen to me sing it and sing it back on their own. So that gives you a taste of switching from rhythm patterns to solfege. So it should make sense that we had this one thing in the anticipatory set that's foundational, and we're just building upon what we've already learned. Now let's talk about how to actually teach melody. In the beginning of my melody instruction with kindergarten, that's my foundational class, I'm going to teach them the difference between high and low. That's the first thing I do. And I will reinforce that throughout the whole lesson for a lesson or two. And then I will bring in going up and going down. And when I teach this to my students, I will pitch it in my voice. For example, I might say, is the note a high note or a low note? Something like that. Point to the sky if it's a high note. Point to the ground if it's a low note. Because you can say high and low to these students, and there's a couple disconnects that might happen. The first disconnect that might happen is they might not understand what you mean by high and low. They might not have a concept of high sounds and low sounds. Don't make that assumption that just because they're in kindergarten and maybe had nursery rhymes that they heard when they were younger, watched a lot of Little Einstein or any of those other things, that they know high and low. That might be something that they've never been taught before or had even been exposed to as a concept. The other disconnect is volume. When students are asked about volume levels, dynamics, they will often say high and low instead of loud and soft. So those two words, if they think of them musically, sometimes those students have only made a connection with loud or soft equaling high and low. The music is too high. The music needs to be lower. For some reason, they've made that connection instead of the music is too loud, the music needs to be softer. So if you pitch it while you're saying it, it really helps to make that connection of what actually is high and what actually is low. So I will do things like, I might say, if I'm singing a high note, point to the sky. If I'm singing a low note, point to the ground. If I'm playing a high note, point to the sky. If I'm playing a low note, point to the ground. And I will make sure that I make them very extreme in the beginning. I don't go and do like middle C to, that one octave right there. I am not going to sit there and hang out in that octave because that is very medium. And yes, is low C lower than the next C up? Absolutely. but the students need to hear extremes in order to really get the idea first. Okay, and then you can bring it back down into a more manageable octave or fifth situation. So once my students understand high and low, then I talk about going up and going down. And I also pitch it the same way that you just heard me do, because you want them to make that connection of what does that sound like musically. If you say going up and going down, they might think you're saying standing up and sitting down. They might not have a concept of what music that is going up, that raising up, sound of pitch, what that is sounding like. They might also think that you're talking about getting louder and getting softer. So you've got to help them make that connection. And if you pitch it, especially with kindergarten, and I still pitch those words when I say them with first grade in the beginning, usually by March, I can stop pitching that anymore with first grade because they've really kind of got it by then. Okay, so once you feel like your students have had a handle, kindergarten and first grade, once they've had a handle on high, low, going up, and going down, once you think that they've got a handle on that, then you can start talking about intervals. And by intervals, I'm not saying first, second, thirds, fourths, fifths, so on, octaves. You don't say that with first grade and kindergarten. We are talking steps, skips, leaps, and repeats. When I teach intervals to kindergarten and first grade, I will use a step bell, and it looks like this. I will also use this when I'm teaching going up and going down, because they can clearly see the directionality of the pitches. So when it comes to the step bell, I love using it as a teacher, and the one that I use is an older version, and I like it better because it's steeper, which I think helps with the visual. I think the smaller bells that are in this video that you're going to see, they don't help with the visual as much. And I don't really like using the step bells for students because it is a little awkward ergonomically, and a lot of times they want to turn it and face it this way so that they're reading C, D, E this direction, and it's just, they don't always know how to handle it. So I prefer either giving them individual bells, like you can see in this picture here, where it's just one bell per note. If I'm going to have them play an interval of some sort, I will give them the C and the E, whichever it is that they're going to play on a particular song. Or the older students will have a full resonator bell set that is flat. So the step bell is really great to use because when you're doing things like steps, skips, leaps, and repeats, they can really see it that way. Whereas if I am just singing it, they can't necessarily hear that I did a skip, a leap. Okay, they might be able to hear a repeat. Hopefully they'll be able to hear a step, but that skip and leap, that's questionable whether or not they're going to be able to hear that, just auditory. So they need a visual help for that. And here's where the notation comes in. So I usually will start on the bell first without any notation, so that they get the concept and can hear the sound and start making that connection. And then I will put the notation in front of them. So here's the notation that I use. And you could just see it's a Google slide. And I always start off with steps. That makes the most sense because they're right next door and they're super easy. So we will look at it. I will play it on the bell and I will tell them that this is steps. And then after I teach steps, we'll talk about skips. They will hear it on the bell and see it on the bell, the step bell. And I will show them on the staff. And I will talk about the fact that a note can go here, and a note can go here, and a note can go here. And these are skips. And they're skips. And then we talk about leaps. That leaps are more than just a skip, that it's like one note, two note, three notes in between that we skipped over. So that's a leap. And then we talk about repeats. And I'm playing all of these on the bells before they ever see it on notation. So one lesson, I might play it all on the bells and just talk about steps, skips, leaps, and repeats on the bells, auditory, and seeing it visually on a bell set. And then the next lesson would be when I would pull in the notation of the actual intervals and repeats. And then once I feel like they understand it a little bit better, I will put something up there and I will say, now who can tell me? Is this steps, skips, leaps, or repeats? And you just progress the instruction that way. All right, so kindergarten and first grade, high, low, going up, going down, making sure you pitch the words as you're going, eventually telling them about steps, skips, leaps, and repeats, and showing them the notation. So that is how I get kindergarten to learn melody. I will show you some melody patterns that I will have them play on different instruments a little bit later on. Right now I want to talk about second grade and up. So second grade and up, especially with second grade, I might do just a quick reminder lesson about steps, skips, leaps, and repeats, and how music moves in that way. But then I'm also going to, starting in second grade, teach the treble clef letters. So you can see before you, we've got treble clef with the letter names on there. And you can use any saying you want. The one that I like, actually a student came up with years ago, and it's not grammatically correct. And that's elephants get big dirty feet. And of course you've got your face. And I use the hand staff a lot so that the students get used to that placement of where they're supposed to be. And you can always quiz them and say, okay, what is this one? What's this one? And they can quiz each other. So the hand staff is a good thing to use. So let's continue on in this presentation. Once I've given them the basics of that lines and spaces, then I put them together like this and show them that it is alphabetical, one after the other. And we talk about that and whether that makes it easier for them to think of it that way or harder for them to think of it that way. It just depends on the student. And then we also talk about the fact that there are notes, letter names that are outside of the actual lines and spaces. So this would be with second grade and up. So the other thing that I will do with second through fifth grade is, I started this last year, I will put words on the treble clef using notation that they have to figure out. Every time that I do this, we will review the letter names of the staff, and I will always do it with the lines first and spaces, and then I will do it alphabetically, because it's just some students get it better when it's elephants get big dirty feet, F-A-C-E, and other students do well with E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, and then you talk about G and D and low C. So it just depends on the student. So I always review it both ways, because you have multiple learners in your class, and they all learn in their own ways. So we will look at this, and I will give the students a chance to think about it. What do they think that word is? And of course, you as a musician, you know that's bag. So in the beginning, we start off very simple with just, 3-letter words. And eventually we will progress to, what is this? 2, 4, 6, 7-letter words. So you got baggage, cabbage. I think those are the standard ones. And I think that's, the final. So I'm talking over several weeks. We've done 3-letter words for a while. We've done 4-letter, 5, 6, and to the 7-letter words, to really get them to think about reading those treble clef letters fluently, so that it will help them to read it musically as well. So when it comes to playing melody instruments, The ones that I have in my classroom that I use all the time are boom whackers, which are fantastic because the kids love hitting them on the floor or on a chair that nobody else is sitting in, of course. And they're pitched percussion tubes. And one of the things that I like about it is I'll give them two that are in the same chord, and that makes it real fun. And then I will also use resonator bells, whether I use individual bells like you'll see in this picture here. You'll see that the boom whackers are color coded. The individual bells that I have are also color coded. So red is C, orange is D, and there's the rest of them. And I will also use individual full bell sets for my older students. I do have handbells in my classroom that I use for performances because they sound really good in the back of the room. I also have a set of choir chimes that I might use for performances. And as far as the bells are concerned, I use those individual bells with kindergarten and first grade for the most part, and the full bell sets with the second grade and up. But if you look here on this screen, you'll see a very simple bell pattern that I actually made on Smart Notebook, which used to have all this fun. It's the software that goes with smartboards, and it used to have all this great gallery pictures that you could put in, and it had this full set of notation and sharps and treble clef and all of that. They have updated it so many times that you have to download those things individually. At least the last time I looked, I haven't made anything new in Smart Notebook anymore because I found other ways to make my notation that makes it a little bit easier for me. But anyway, this is a Smart Notebook file, and it goes with a song about snowflakes going up, 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 and down, down, down. Okay, so I just took up, 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 down, down, down. That's all I did was I took those and I pitched it on the treble clef for them, and I will give the students either bells or boom whackers. I think what I usually do, and this is probably what I'm going to do next week, is I'm going to put A, B, C on the bells because that's really close together, super easy to play, and I will give B, G, D out as individual boom whackers throughout half of the class. So I usually will have half the class play the bells, half the class play the boom whackers, and then we'll do the song a second time and they switch. So if I have, let's say, 10 students playing the boom whackers, I might give 3 students a B, 3 students a G, 4 students a D, however that ends up working out. And the other students, the other half of the class, will have bell sets and they're playing A, B, C. This is one of my newer ones that I just made this week. So you can see that the song is embedded. So I don't even have to, I don't have to pull it up on the iPod or anything else. I just click on the song right there while this is on the smartboard. And I just advance the slides while the students are playing. So you can see that it's E, F, D, C. This is going to be for my kindergarten students, and I am just going to give them individual bells, and they are going to hit that bell 2 times each time I tell them that it's their turn. What I did was I have all those individual bells that you see a picture of right here. I took them years ago and I got plastic bins about the size of a shoebox with lids on them, and I put all of my low C's in a couple of them. So they filled up, each letter filled up 2 bins. So all my low C's are in a couple bins. All my D's are in a couple bins because I had like about 35 bell sets that were low C to high C. And the case that they were in was kind of cracked and falling apart. They were in individual cases and it was kind of cracked and falling apart. And every time I would ask a student to open it up and take out just C or E or, 2 things, it would take them a while to get the right bells that I wanted them to use. With kindergarten or first grade, it's just easier to say, okay, here's your one bell you're going to play, or here's your two bells you're going to play, and less confusion over I'm looking at 8 bells and which 2 does she want me to use or which one does she want me to use. In the beginning, I always only let kindergarten play 1 bell at a time. Then eventually we'll get up to 2. Eventually we'll get up more than that. In late May, I will usually put kindergarten on that full flat bell set just so they get that experience. First grade will go on that full flat bell set at about April or so. So they have some time to do those individual bells again, and then we transfer them over to the full bell set. So before they even come in, I will put a bell in their basket, but I will hang on to the mallets and I will pass those out individually because I know what's going to happen as soon as they see that new instrument that they've never seen before. They're going to pick up those mallets and start playing. So let me just take a moment to talk about creating these patterns for your students to play melodically. Obviously, you have to look at the piece of music, the notated music. I could have made this where we were just playing E, 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 or maybe something like C, E, C, E, C, E, C, E, whatever might have worked with the song. I, however, decided that I wanted to look at the song and pick out a particular note for each measure of this 4-measure pattern that I wanted to do, because the 4-measure pattern was on my head, on my nose, on my hands, on my toes, on my head, on my nose, on my hands, on my toes. So I wanted them to play a note for each measure that actually went with the measure. So that is why mine is not just a C, E, C, E, C, E, C, E, C, E. So thanks for watching, and I hope you got some good ideas about how to teach melody in your classroom. Basically, you're just stepping off from rhythm. You've given them the foundation of all those rhythm patterns, and now you're just pitching it on the staff. And you start out with the younger ones with making sure that they know what high, low, going up, going down are. Then you can move them into intervals, steps, skips, leaps, and repeats. And by 2nd grade, you're teaching them the treble clef, and you're also giving them the experience of putting all of that information onto melody instruments as they look at notated melodies. There are all sorts of choices when it comes to creating melodic accompaniment for your students. It could be as simple as a repeated note over and over again. It could be a 2-note pattern that's repeated over and over again. It could be a simple pattern like this one, this 4-measure pattern that I created. It could be a full descant. Many different choices depending on what students you have, depending on what grade level you're working with, depending on your supplies that you have as far as your instrumentation, and depending on your comfort level as well. In my opinion, it's always easier to start out super easy and increase later on than to give your students something that is really difficult that they wouldn't be able to handle very quickly. I will tell you that I played this pattern with a group of 3rd graders the other day. They thought they did very well. They played the entire pattern on a flat bell set. They didn't have these individual bells, and I didn't put them in groups. They all played all 4 notes in order, and for them it was super easy. But for kindergarten, you would only start with 1 note per student. In the description box, I am going to include a link to my How to Teach Rhythm and another video that I made on creating rhythm and melody ostinato patterns. The melody that I created in that particular video actually didn't end up being an ostinato pattern. It was more of a descant, but it might give you more of an idea about how to create a descant if you chose to do that instead of just a back and forth C, E, C, E. Okay, that's all I have to say about teaching melody. I hope that you learned something useful today. And don't forget to subscribe. Have a wonderful day.